Imagine someone pays your billion-dollar ransom, throws open your maximum security prison cell, and, well, hands you the keys to absolute freedom. They say, you are clear, go live your life.
Right. That sounds incredible.
Yeah, but then the very next day, you walk back up to the gates, you hand back the keys, and you willingly demand to be locked up again in an even smaller, tighter cell.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it sounds like absolute madness. Why would anyone do that?
It really does.
Yeah.
But human nature hasn't actually changed all that much, even if the circumstances have.
Exactly. So welcome to the deep dive. As we tackle that bizarre human contradiction today, I want to warmly greet you wherever you are listening from and offer a genuine divine blessing for your day and the week ahead, wishing you peace and guidance in whatever you are facing right now. We are just so glad you're joining us.
It is a real privilege to unpack this specific historical puzzle with you today.
Today, we are opening up a really fascinating historical and theological file. We are looking at the Apostle Paul's letter to the Galatians, specifically chapter 4. And we are using the detailed historical context from the Holman and Nevoe study Bibles to kind of reconstruct their world.
Right, which is so necessary for this text.
Yeah, our mission is to understand that central tension we just talked about. Like, why do people who have been given ultimate freedom suddenly choose to put themselves back into chains?
Yeah.
To figure that out, we are going to explore ancient trust funds, a mysterious illness that altered a whole community, and an intense family drama involving two mothers that literally shaped history.
I mean, to really grasp the gravity of Paul's argument here,
Yeah.
we have to strip away all our modern 21st century assumptions.
Oh, absolutely.
If we look at this text without understanding ancient Roman law and, ancient Jewish history, the profound nature of what is happening here is just going to fly completely over our heads.
So let's establish that foundation. Paul starts chapter 4 with an analogy about a young heir to a massive estate. As I was reading the study notes, the closest modern equivalent I could think of is like a trust fund kid.
Oh, that is a great comparison.
Right. Imagine a teenager who stands to inherit a global empire. Technically, on paper, that kid is a billionaire, but because they are a minor, their daily life is heavily restricted.
Yeah, they don't actually have the power yet.
Exactly. They don't have access to the vault. They get a strict allowance. They are managed by a board of directors, and they are told exactly what time to be home. Practically speaking, they are living like an employee.
Right.
In fact, Paul uses even stronger language. He says in the ancient world, the child is no different from a slave.
Yeah, and the terminology operating in the background here is deeply entrenched in Roman legal custom. The study notes highlight that a minor heir was placed under the absolute authority of what the Romans called tutors and curators.
Wait, let me stop you there. We're talking about like school tutors, like someone teaching them math?
Oh, no, it is much more expansive than that. Yeah. The tutors were legal guardians responsible for the physical protection, upbringing, and just strict discipline of the minor. They managed the person.
Okay, got it.
The curators, on the other hand, were the curators or administrators, the financial managers who handled the estate and the assets so the kid didn't, squander the fortune.
So the heir had zero control over their own life or money.
Absolutely zero. And a crucial mechanism in this Roman law was that the father of the child had already set a predetermined date.
Like a timer.
Exactly. The father's will dictated the exact time when that child would come of age, throw off the authority of the guardians, and finally receive their full legal rights.
So the kid is just trapped in a holding pattern, waiting for a clock to run out that they didn't even set.
Yeah, and Paul uses this exact legal reality to describe the spiritual state of humanity before Christ. He writes that when we were minors, we were enslaved to the rudiments of the world.
That word rudiments, it feels so heavy and, well, archaic. What is the actual definition there?
It translates to the elemental principles, like the basic ABCs of religion and the world.
Oh, okay.
Think of it as the foundational, rigid rules of an elementary school classroom. For Jewish people at the time, this meant living under the strict, minute supervision of the Mosaic law.
Right.
For Gentiles, the non-Jewish people, it meant being enslaved to basic pagan concepts, worldly philosophies, and demonic superstitions.
So basically, both groups were treated as children.
Exactly. Locked under strict systems of rules, completely managed, just waiting for a massive transition.
I mean, if you are listening to this right now and you've ever felt trapped by an endless checklist or a bureaucracy where you just have no agency, you probably know a fraction of what this young heir felt.
Oh, absolutely.
Which sets up one of the most famous phrases in the text. Galatians 4:4 says, But when the fullness of the time had come, God sent forth his son. It implies a very specific moment. Why then? Why not, like, 1,000 years earlier or 100 years later?
Well, the fullness of time is just a brilliant historical concept. The study notes emphasize that this wasn't some random date pulled out of a hat.
Right.
It points to God's providential timing. The world had been meticulously, almost impossibly prepared for this exact moment to allow a message to spread globally.
Walk me through that preparation. What did the geopolitical map actually look like back then?
It starts with the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For the first time in centuries, the Mediterranean basin and beyond experienced this unprecedented stability.
So no massive wars.
Right. Borders were secure, piracy on the seas was suppressed, and massive international wars had basically ceased. You could actually travel without assuming you were going to be killed.
Wow.
On top of that, you had the Roman roads. The empire had engineered a massive network of paved, durable highways originally designed to march legions across the world quickly.
It is like the ancient equivalent of laying down fiber optic cables for the internet. You have this massive physical infrastructure ready to carry information.
That is a perfect analogy. And then you add the software to run on that infrastructure, which was Koine Greek.
Right, because of Alexander the Great.
Exactly. Because of his conquests centuries prior, Greek had become the lingua franca, the common universal language of commerce and daily life. You could walk into a market in Italy, Egypt, or Asia Minor, and people could actually communicate.
That is incredible.
Yeah. So the physical roads, the linguistic unity, and the political peace meant the message of the gospel could spread from city to city in a way that was literally impossible in any previous era. The time was completely full. The date set by the Father had arrived.
And the purpose of that timing, according to the text, was to redeem those under the law so they could receive the adoption as sons. I want to pause here because, when you and I think of adoption, we picture a family bringing an infant or a young child into their home to raise them.
Right, of course.
But the Roman context for adoption flips that entirely, doesn't it?
Oh, it is a completely different mechanism. The Greek word Paul uses is huethesia, which legally translates to the placing of a son. Okay, in the upper echelons of Roman culture, adoption frequently had nothing to do with infants. A wealthy patriarch, lacking a suitable heir to take over his empire, would legally adopt a fully grown adult male.
That just seems wild to a modern listener. You just go out and adopt a 30-year-old.
Yeah, it was a massive legal transaction.
Right.
When this happened, the adopted adult's previous debts were entirely wiped out. All rights, wealth, and status of the new father were instantly transferred to this newly adopted adult son.
Oh, wow.
Paul is telling his audience that believers are given this exact legal standing. You aren't put on some probationary period. You are legally placed as a full adult heir with immediate access to the inheritance.
But Paul doesn't leave it in the courtroom. Like, it doesn't stay a cold bureaucratic transaction. The text says that along with this legal status, God sends the spirit of his son into their hearts, crying, Abba, Father.
Yeah, the contrast there is stunning. Abba is an Aramaic term. It completely lacks the stiffness of the formal English word father.
Right.
It carries the intimate, deeply personal connotation of papa or dad.
So it's much warmer.
Exactly. You get the full, ironclad legal wealth of a Roman adoption, seamlessly combined with the profound intimacy of a child who knows they are safe with their dad.
Just think about that shift for a second. They went from being managed like slaves by the world's basic rules, terrified of stepping out of line, to being full, wealthy, intimately loved heirs.
Yeah.
And that transition makes the Galatians' next move utterly baffling. It is the paradox that drives this entire letter.
I mean, it defies all logic.
Look at Galatians 4:8 through 11. Paul is looking at this community and essentially saying, you used to be slaves to gods that aren't even real. Now you know the true God, or rather you are known by him. So why on earth are you turning back to these weak, beggarly rudiments?
Right.
If someone unlocked your prison cell, gave you $1 billion and invited you into their family, why would you go back to the prison and demand to be put in chains again?
To understand the psychology behind that relapse, we really have to re-examine those rudiments. Remember, the study notes show a dual meaning here.
Okay, break that down.
Well, these Galatians were Gentiles. Their background was pagan. They were originally slaves to spiritual superstitions, idols, and demonic bondage. They lived in constant fear of offending the wrong deity.
And they were freed from that fear.
But then, a new group enters the picture. False teachers, often referred to as Judaizers, infiltrate their churches.
Right.
And these teachers are incredibly persuasive. They tell the Galatians, well, it's great that you believe in Christ, but simple faith isn't enough. If you want to be truly right with God, if you want to guarantee your standing, you also have to strictly observe the Jewish ceremonial law.
Oh, I see.
You have to guard specific days, months, seasons, and years.
So they are adding a massive asterisk to the freedom. They're demanding observance of the Sabbath days, the ancient festivals, the religious calendars.
Yes, and here is the explosive theological connection Paul makes, which probably offended a lot of people. He equates the two systems.
Wait, how so?
He looks at these Gentile believers who are suddenly obsessing over strict Jewish ceremonial calendars to earn their salvation. And he says, you are returning to the exact same spiritual slavery you just escaped.
Wait, I want to make sure I'm grasping the scale of this. Paul, a former Pharisee, is looking at people trying to follow biblical religious calendars, and he is telling them that doing so to earn salvation is no different than their old pagan idolatry.
Yeah, it is a revolutionary claim. The study notes clarify the underlying mechanism perfectly. Paul is arguing that any system where you try to justify yourself by your own works makes you a slave.
Wow.
It doesn't matter if the system is a pagan ritual sacrificing to a statue or a distortion of the Mosaic law keeping track of holy days. If the underlying engine is human effort meant to earn God's favor, it is a weak and beggarly rudiment.
That makes so much sense.
You are voluntarily walking right back into the prison cell because, well, you feel safer when you have a checklist to manage.
It is the illusion of control. And that realization just breaks Paul's heart, which explains the sudden tonal shift in the letter. Right after laying out this intense theological critique, he drops the legal arguments. From verses 12 to 20, he makes this incredibly emotional, personal plea.
Right.
He reminds them of their shared history together.
He takes them back to the raw vulnerability of their first meeting.
Yeah, the sources mention that Paul originally preached to them because of a physical infirmity. Like he wasn't there on a victorious speaking tour. He was grounded because he was sick.
The text describes it as a temptation in the flesh. And while we don't have a medical chart, the historical context provides two very compelling theories for what this illness actually was.
The first theory involves the geography of where they were, right?
Yes, exactly. The first prominent theory suggests Paul contracted a severe, debilitating case of malaria while traveling through the marshy lowlands of Pamphylia before heading up into the Galatian region.
Oh, wow.
This specific strain of ancient malaria would have caused intense recurring fevers and extreme physical weakness, completely halting his travel plans and forcing him to rely on the locals just to survive.
That paints a picture of a very weak, vulnerable man. But there's a second theory that is even more specific and honestly a bit jarring.
Yeah, the second theory is that he suffered from a severe repulsive eye disease. This isn't just a guess either. It comes directly from a clue Paul leaves in verse 15.
Oh, right.
He is reminding the Galatians of how deeply they used to care for him, and he writes, if it were possible, you would have plucked out your own eyes and given them to me.
That is such a vivid, bizarre thing to say unless it is literal. Like, it implies his eyes were the source of his agony, or perhaps they looked grotesque, and the Galatians loved him so much they wanted to literally trade places with him to relieve his suffering.
Exactly. And you have to consider the societal norms of the ancient world. Illness was often viewed as a divine curse.
Right, like he was being punished.
Yeah, so despite how awful he must have looked, despite his sickness being a trial that should have made them reject him as a cursed man, they didn't. They welcomed him as an angel of God.
So he is holding up a mirror to their current behavior. He is asking, what happened to the people who would have gouged out their own eyes for me? Why are you suddenly treating me like an enemy?
Right.
And the catalyst for that change is the false teachers.
Which brings up a fascinating point about psychological manipulation within communities. The false teachers are paying a massive amount of attention to the Galatians. They seem incredibly zealous. But Paul exposes the dark mechanism running underneath that zeal.
The study notes call it the exclusive club tactic. It is basically middle school psychology weaponized in an ancient religious setting.
It is entirely based on creating a false deficit. The study notes explain that these false teachers want to build an exclusive religious in-group. But, a club only feels elite if you're keeping people out. So they actively shut the Galatians out, telling them, you aren't true believers. You don't have the full truth unless you follow all of our extra ceremonial rules.
I mean, if you are listening, think about how powerful that form of manipulation is. When someone tells you that you don't belong, human nature often doesn't reject the person saying it. Instead, you become desperate to prove them wrong.
Absolutely.
You become zealous to follow their arbitrary rules just to earn your way back into their good graces. They invent a sickness so they can sell you the cure.
And Paul is watching his spiritual children fall for this toxic dynamic. He uses a jarring metaphor to describe his own anguish over it. He says he feels like a mother experiencing labor pains all over again for them.
Until Christ is formed in you, he already birthed this church through the suffering of his initial illness, and now he is in agony again because they're regressing.
Yeah.
And to finally shatter the illusion of these manipulative teachers, Paul decides to fight fire with fire. The false teachers are obsessing over the law of Moses. So Paul says, all right, let's open the law. Let's look at the foundational story in the book of Genesis.
This launches us into the final section of the chapter, the allegory of the two mothers. Paul takes the bedrock story of the Jewish faith, the story of the patriarch Abraham, and interprets it allegorically to dismantle the legalists' entire argument.
Right, so Abraham has two sons. One is Ishmael, born to Hagar, who is a slave woman. The other is Isaac, born to Sarah, who is the free woman.
And Paul uses these two historical women to set up a masterclass in theological contrast. The study notes provide a clear breakdown of the two systems they represent.
Before we get into the theology of it, let's talk about the practical behavior here. When I read the story of Hagar and Ishmael, it strikes me as the ancient equivalent of modern hustle culture.
Oh, that's interesting. Unpack that connection.
Yeah.
How does Hagar relate to hustle culture?
Well, God promised Abraham a son, but time passes. 10 years go by. Abraham and Sarah are getting old, the situation looks biologically impossible, and God is silent.
Right.
So they panic, they can't handle the waiting, so they decide to engineer a human solution. They use Hagar, Sarah's servant, to force the result through their own effort. That is what Paul defines as being born according to the flesh.
Yeah, I see where you're going with this.
If you are listening to this and you are exhausted because you constantly feel like if you don't manipulate the circumstances, force the outcome, and rely on your own relentless effort, your life is going to fall apart without.
Well, that is the spirit of Hagar. It is human ingenuity trying to do God's job.
That is an incredibly sharp parallel. In Paul's allegory, the study notes show that Hagar represents Mount Sinai, the location where the strict law of Moses was given.
Okay.
She represents the present physical city of Jerusalem of Paul's day, which was occupied by Rome and spiritually enslaved to this exact kind of legalistic hustle. Therefore, Hagar's system only brings forth children into slavery.
But then, in total contrast, you have Sarah. Right. Sarah and her son Isaac represent the exact opposite mechanism. Isaac was born through the promise. He was a miraculous intervention by God when human effort was demonstrably useless.
Yeah.
I mean, Sarah was long past the age of bearing children.
It was just difficult. It was impossible. Human hands could not achieve it.
Exactly. And in the allegory, Sarah represents the new covenant. She represents the heavenly Jerusalem. She represents absolute freedom, relying entirely on God to fulfill what he said he would do.
Wow.
She is the true mother of all believers. You have two violently opposing systems here. Flesh versus promise, slavery versus freedom, exhausting human effort versus divine grace.
Which forces a confrontation. You can't have both. Paul reaches the climax of the chapter and asks a brutal question. What do we do with these two opposing systems? What is the final instruction?
Yeah.
And the answer he pulls directly from Scripture is incredibly harsh.
Cast out the slave woman and her son.
Cast her out. I read that and think, isn't there room for compromise? Can't we just find a middle ground where we trust God a little bit, but also keep a checklist just in case?
Well, the historical background in the study notes explains exactly why compromise is impossible. Just as Ishmael, who was born of the flesh, mocked and persecuted Isaac, who was born of the spirit, the legalists of Paul's day were actively persecuting the true believers.
Oh.
They were trying to drag the free children back into the mud of slavery.
So the two systems are literally allergic to each other.
Precisely. To cast out the slave woman is a command to completely and decisively reject the false teachers. It means radically rejecting the notion that you can contribute to your own justification by your works.
Right.
You cannot mix human effort for salvation with God's free grace. The son of the slave woman will not share the inheritance with the son of the free woman. They cannot coexist. You're either relying entirely on the promise or you're relying entirely on your own resume.
Wow. We have covered a massive amount of ground in this deep dive. We started by looking at ancient Roman trust funds, where heirs were micromanaged like slaves, just waiting for the fullness of time.
We did.
We explored the providential setup of the Roman roads, the Pax Romana, and the universal Greek language that acted as the infrastructure for grace to explode across the world.
And then we examined the baffling paradox of believers willingly returning to the chains of legalism, driven by a need for control, which Paul dared to equate with returning to pagan idolatry.
We looked at the deeply personal history between Paul and the Galatians, a relationship forged in the vulnerability of physical illness, and how that love was twisted by the manipulative, exclusive club tactics of false teachers.
Right.
And finally, we landed on this intense allegory of two mothers, Hagar and Sarah. The exhausting human hustle of trying to earn our way versus the profound freedom of simply trusting the divine promise.
And the ultimate synthesis of Paul's argument is that believers are not meant to live as employees trying to earn a wage. We are meant to be children of the free woman. We are fully vested heirs who have been given the Spirit to intimately call God Abba, Father.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We spent a lot of time talking about the difference between a slave and an heir. But let's look inward. Think about your own internal monologue this week.
Ah, that's good.
If you possess this incredible inheritance of freedom and peace, how often do you still talk to yourself like an employee who is terrified of being fired? How often do you treat the peace you've been given as a wage you have to constantly re-earn every single day rather than a permanent gift you get to simply enjoy? An heir doesn't wake up wondering if they still belong in the house.
It completely shifts your reality when you stop trying to earn your place and start living from it.
It changes everything. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Galatians. God blesses all the listeners. We hope you have a truly wonderful week ahead. Take care, and we will catch you next time.